Thank you, everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. I do have one quick favor before we get to the video that you came here for, and that is very simply this. You see that little red subscribe button below this video? Go ahead, smash that subscribe button. It really does help me. It really does help this channel grow and my audience grow. So go ahead and hit that red subscribe button. And now, here is the video that you came here for. Speaking of college hoops, let's transition to your boy, Gregg Marshall. And when I say your boy, I mean your boy because he's not my boy because I want nothing to do with the guy. But big story in college hoops, and I'm sure most of you kind of already have the background, but for those who maybe, listen, frankly, I think a lot of us kind of got lost in the shuffle because of college football, because of the NFL, and because of the NBA. But what you need to know about Gregg Marshall is this. Gregg Marshall, head coach, Wichita State, incredibly successful head coach. Made the Final Four in 2013, undefeated regular season in 2014, 7 straight trips to the NCAA tournament from the 2011-2012 season to 2018-2019. This year they were on the verge of going to another NCAA tournament before the season was canceled. And when the season was canceled, something kind of important happened that was kind of a preview of what has come this week. And what happened after the season was this. Wichita State had a bunch of dudes transfer out of the program. And that might feel like no big deal, but I think it is in the context of this. If you can think back to March 12th, 13th, 14th, 15th, I'm talking a day or two after the NCAA tournament was canceled. If you can remember back to that time, you will remember that the whole world was frozen in uncertainty, right? We didn't know if we could leave our houses. We went to the grocery store. We'd come right home. We didn't know what to do. We were stocking up. We were stealing stuff off the shelves. Nobody could get toilet paper. Remember that awful time in March of 2020 when we couldn't get toilet paper? Nobody knew what was going on. Everybody was hesitant to do anything. Except at Wichita State, where the day after the season ended, 3 players entered the transfer portal. And within a week, 6 players entered the transfer portal. And what was crazy about it was you couldn't make the argument that it was just a bunch of guys at the end of the bench that weren't happy with their playing time. That was certainly part of it. There was a guy or two that left that was probably looking for more playing time. But when they left, first of all, it was the abruptness of it, right? Because again, guys were hesitant to do anything in March 13th, 14th, 15th because they didn't know what the world was going to look like. They didn't know when it was going to get back to normal, if they were going to be able to visit campuses. And so to have 3 players leave the day after the season is canceled, and oh, by the way, after that, you have 6 players in total enter the portal. 1 did eventually come back. It raised eyebrows, and it raised eyebrows for the reason that I was about to get to that I kind of danced around and I didn't get to. That was that you couldn't make the case it was the guys at the end of the bench because 2 of the team's leading 3 scorers entered the transfer portal. Guard named Jamarius Burton, who's now at Texas Tech. Wing named Eric Stevenson, who is now at Washington. And they also had a kid named Grant Sherfield, who was a freshman who was 3rd on the team in minutes, who entered the transfer portal. And so you couldn't make the case it was a bunch of malcontents at the end of the bench, and you didn't really know why. Well, we started to get a reason. We started to figure out why over the course of the last week because Wichita State is under fire. And what essentially happened is this. Late Thursday, you're watching Bucks, Bears. Tom Brady can't do anything. He's got a noodle arm. He doesn't know how many downs there are, all that stuff. The Athletic puts out a report that essentially says that Wichita State is currently in the midst of an internal investigation surrounding its basketball program, really stemming from 2 incidents. One, there was a belief that Gregg Marshall, the head coach, had pushed a player named Shaq Morris, and then a second incident in which he kind of yelled and screamed at a student who was parking in his parking space. So that sounds bad, right? But then like 2 minutes later, Jeff Goodman, probably the best Big J capital journalist that covers college basketball, and I'm kind of saying that tongue-in-cheek, but I mean it sincerely. He's an excellent journalist. Puts out this damning report. It's 6 months in the making, and I'm pretty sure it stemmed from the question that I asked a minute ago. If you go back 6 months, That's the middle of March when everybody was transferring from Wichita and when everybody was trying to figure out what was going on at Wichita State. And Jeff Goodman kind of got to the bottom of it because he had a scathing, damning report in which basically Gregg Marshall was accused pretty much of everything wrong that a coach could do in every way possible by dozens of players. The kid Shaq Morris that was alleged to have been pushed in the previous article. Well, this article, Jeff Goodman talked to Shaq Morris, and he said on the record, not only was I pushed, I was punched in the face. So the head coach at Wichita State punches a kid in the face. It is corroborated. In other words, 4, 5, 6 other people that were in the gym at that point confirmed it, including one other person on the record using their name confirmed that this thing happens. So it's not one malcontent. It's 4, 5, 6 guys saying it. Then you have another incident in which Gregg Marshall apparently choked an assistant coach, which is relatively unprecedented. I mean, coaches get into fights all the time. I don't know how often they're choking them. And then there's all these other random things that pop up. One, there's some accusations of kind of some comments with some racial undertones. There is a player, he's actually still at Wichita State, named Isaiah Poorbear Chandler, who is of Native American descent. According to Goodman's report, this is a direct quote, Gregg Marshall told him to, quote, get back on his horse, and then made some, quote-unquote, Indian howling noises at him during a practice not last season but the season before. There was also an accusation that they had a player at Wichita State last year named Jamie Echenique, who was from Columbia, and according to Goodman's report, Marshall told that guy that he would make a good coffee bean picker because apparently the guy wasn't very good at catching the basketball, and so I don't even really understand the analogy, but obviously Columbia known for its coffee. There was a situation, this is the most bizarre one that I saw, is that he told a player, Eric Stevenson, who I mentioned transferred, he's a white kid, he did not take a jump shot in practice when Gregg Marshall thought that he should take the jump shot. And so later in film session, Gregg Marshall said this, and this is again a quote from the Jeff Goodman article, I think you're afraid of brothers, guys raised by their grandparents eating PB&Js. And so that appears to be a comment about African-American players, that essentially this white kid was afraid of African-American players when he was playing on the other side of the ball. And so there's other accusations, but those are the gist, right? I mean, it's punching a player, it's choking an assistant, and it's making racial slurs. There's also all kinds of just verbal abuse beyond the racial slurs. But yeah, let me just tell you right now, that's not very good. And at the very least, it does help explain kind of some of the turnover and turmoil at Wichita State. But yeah, it's not good. And Wichita State has announced that they're in the middle of this investigation. Gregg Marshall has released a statement that he believes that while he was trying to motivate players or trying to, inspire them, trying to push them beyond their comfort zone, but he doesn't believe that he crossed any lines in terms of who he is as a person or how he treated his players. And so let's get into the nitty-gritty because this is a crazy story. He allegedly punched a player, choked a coach, and made all kinds of racial remarks. And what I would say is this, before we go any further, I do want to say, I think most of you guys have listened to this podcast long enough, listened to this show long enough to know that I'm not a big, we always have to defend the players and the coaches are always wrong. It's like, no. A couple years ago when Tom Izzo was screaming at Aaron Henry, I was kind of like, dude, that's part of basketball. Sometimes you get yelled at by your coach. I defend Nick Saban when he goes crazy on the sidelines. I defend Kirby Smart when he goes crazy on the sidelines. I defend, obviously, Jim Calhoun, one of the greatest coaches ever that I grew up watching. These guys were all yellers. And that's part of the sports culture, like it or not, is that there is a lot of yelling and screaming. And so as a general rule, as you guys know, I try to look at both sides of a story. I try not to too many generalities. I try not to make too many assumptions, and I try to be fair to both sides. But what I would say is, while sports are filled with coaches who are yellers and screamers, I think it's safe to say that if the allegations are true, And Gregg Marshall does deserve the benefit of the doubt. He deserves to have his side of the story presented to this internal investigation. But if the allegations are true, yeah, he crossed every line, right? So first of all, there's a difference between yelling and screaming. There's a difference between using swear words. There's a difference between calling a guy an MFer or something of that nature, which some of you, by the way, are probably offended by. Me personally, that's the coaching that I grew up with, so I don't have as much of a problem with it. I think it's largely been taken out of sports, really, probably since I played sports 2 decades ago. But I understand that's part of sports. I understand that's how it is. And so ultimately, that kind of language, as crude as it may be in any other walk of life, I really don't have that much of a problem with it. Where the line gets crossed, though, is the alleged racial allegations. You cannot tell a Native American player to get back on a horse. You cannot tell a Colombian player that he's going to be a coffee bean picker. You cannot talk about African-American players as guys being raised by their grandmas who ate PB&J. That's ridiculous. That's unacceptable. You cannot say things like that. And we all have our different backgrounds. We all have our different ethnicities. We all have our different, buttons. Obviously, I'm part Hispanic. There's not a lot that would offend me, but you just can't say that no matter what you mean. And you can't claim that it's inspired by trying to be a good head coach. You just don't have to say that. It doesn't even make sense. I don't know where you would even come up with the idea of telling a Native American kid to get back on his horse. It doesn't even make any sense. So that's one. And then I think beyond that is the much bigger issue, which is very simply, you can't put your hands on players. You just can't do it. And again, I understand sports are aggressive. I understand that things get physical and sometimes you're doing a box-out drill and maybe you throw an elbow that gets a little too close to the chin or whatever. I understand that sports are by nature not working in an office. You can't compare what happens in your office and what's acceptable in your office to what happens in the huddle in football or in a rebounding drill in basketball. But this was a close-handed fist punch to the face. It had to be separated, and according to the reports, Fred VanVleet, who is now with the Toronto Raptors, played at Wichita State, basically went to Gregg Marshall's went to his office after practice and said, "Bro, we are not practicing again until you apologize to that dude for what you did." And so what I would say is, you can't touch a player, and I don't see how Gregg Marshall survives this. And again, I'm not like Mr. Fire everybody and you can't be tough as a coach and, kids today have all no. And I do believe, as I said a minute ago, that a coach or anyone who is accused of these things deserves his day in court. And by court, I mean in front of the investigators and all that stuff. What I would also say is, again, Jeff Goodman is really good at his job. And Jeff Goodman would not have published this article if he wasn't pretty sure that this stuff had actually happened. He got a couple players on the record to, at the very least, confirm that Shaq Morris was punched. He has many more players confirming that all of these incidents happened. And I just don't know how you survive it. And I will say in Gregg Marshall's defense, before we kind of wrap up on this topic, he has had players come out to support him, former players who are no longer with the program. Nick Wiggins and Cleanthony Early, who are part of those two really, really good teams in 2013. In 2013 when the team went to the Final Four, 2014 when the team finished the regular season undefeated. He has had players from those teams come out and defend him. And again, he has defended himself, releasing a statement saying, I was tough, I was gruff, I was at times not a very nice person, but I don't have a malicious bone in my body, basically. But what I would also say in terms of the players defending him is that those players left in 2014, and all these accusations happen after they left. So while these players are saying that, yes, he's tough, but he built us into men and we love coach and all that stuff, they weren't there for the specific incidents that happened here over the last couple years in which Gregg Marshall is being accused of. But to wrap up on this topic as we start to get out of here, what I would essentially say is I just don't see how he survives this. And I'm not rooting for him to get fired. I think that he probably thought in his head that this was just how you coach, and he's in his mid-50s, and this was how he was raised as a coach, and sometimes you got to get tough with your players. But I'll tell you this, One, as I said, you can't put your hands on players, and obviously the racial comments are completely unacceptable. And to take it to a further level, I just don't see how this internal investigation ends well for him, because the players who talk to Goodman are willing to talk to the school. And the way that I look at it, if you read the report or the statement from the university about the investigation, it very clearly looks as though it is the school trying to do an investigation so that they can fire him with cause. And for people who don't understand with cause versus without cause, if you just want to fire a coach because he's not very good, that's fine, you can do it, but you owe them all the money that's on their contract. And what you do when you fire somebody without cause is that you fire them for a reason that is essentially a breach of contract, and that you will not owe them any money for actually firing them. And so with this situation with Gregg Marshall, he's owed $15 million if he is fired without cause. And so I believe that the lawyers involved are looking to confirm these reports. They are looking to fire him with cause so they do not have to pay out the remainder of his salary. And I'll just be honest, I'd be surprised if he's the head coach at Wichita State maybe 6 or 8 months from now. Can he survive this situation? I don't think so. Can he survive through the week? Yes. Can he survive maybe even into the season as the investigation is ongoing? I do believe he probably can if he wants to fight it, but eventually the truth is going to come out. I believe he deserves a chance to present his side of the truth, but I just don't know how this many people say this many things about you and you end up keeping your job. All right.